studios in Melbourne, live. The Bolt Report. Now, Andrew Bolt.
Welcome to the show, and viewers, we have a new Prime Minister. Scott Morrison, the former Treasurer, is now our 7th Prime Minister in just 11 years.
I, Scott John Morrison, do swear that I will well and truly serve the people of Australia in the office of Prime Minister, and that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Australia, so help me God.
The Pentecostal Christian narrowly beat his more conservative rival, former Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton, and straight away promised to stop the brawling and start the governing.
There was a ballot conducted in the party room for the leadership of the Liberal Party. The successful candidate was Scott Morrison.
There's been a lot of talk this week about whose side people are on in this building. And what Josh and I are here to tell you, as the new generation of Liberal leadership, is we're on your side.
Now, Scott Morrison talks much more the talk of the western suburb seats of Sydney that the Liberals badly need to win, and he talks it certainly much better than Malcolm Turnbull ever could. And I feel more positive about this change than I thought I would. But have the Liberals just changed the salesman without changing the product, changed leaders without changing the policies that killed Malcolm Turnbull, electricity, global warming, immigration? Because if that's the case, then all this pain may be for nothing. This bitter, vicious, drawn-out knife fight this week will have just deepened public disgust with Australian politics. It's already left the government, the Liberal Party particularly, looking like a war zone, utterly divided by hate and ideology and a few corpses along the way. Now, Scott Morrison did immediately promise to heal the party that has seen this week past any saving.
Now, our job, particularly for Josh and I, as we take forward this new mantle of leadership as a new generation, is to ensure that we not only bring our party back together, which has been bruised and battered this week, but that will enable us to ensure we bring the Parliament back together, that we can continue to work to ensure that our country stays close together.
But Malcolm Turnbull, a narcissist, selfish to the last, he wasn't going to help Morrison heal anything. He went down swinging at his enemies, real or imagined, refusing to take any personal responsibility for the chaos or the 23 months now of losing polls.
There was a determined insurgency from a number of people, both in the party room and sort of backed by voices, powerful voices in the media, really to bring, if not bring down the government, certainly bring down my prime ministership. It was extraordinary. It was described as madness by many, and I think it's difficult to describe it in any other way.
And Malcolm Turnbull gloated at the defeat of Peter Dutton today, which Turnbull had helped to achieve by stalling the leadership vote for a critical day to give Scott Morrison time to twist some arms, make some promises and get the numbers.
I was impressed by how many of my colleagues spoke or voted for loyalty above disloyalty, how the insurgents were not rewarded by electing Mr Dutton.
So, what can Scott Morrison now do to end this civil war that's been tearing apart his Liberal Party? He's already offered his rival Dutton a ministry job, and Dutton in turn pledged loyalty.
My course from here is to provide absolute loyalty to Scott Morrison to make sure that we win the election and that we defeat Bill Shorten.
But Tony Abbott, who was betrayed by Morrison when he lost his own Prime Ministership, he didn't at first congratulate him for his win.
We've lost the Prime Minister, but there is still a government to save. And that's what all of us will do our best to do now, to save the government.
And yet, I can't help thinking that maybe Morrison could yet heal this division, or at least keep the government kind of together until sometime into next year, and hopefully if they last that long before the election. On the one side, you see, Scott Morrison did get the votes of the Liberal left, with Turnbull's support, including the supporters of Foreign Minister Julie Bishop, after she was knocked out in the first round of voting for the leadership. And on the other side, well, look, it is true that many Conservative Liberals still don't trust Scott Morrison for ratting out on Abbott in 2015 and for backing the leftist Turnbull ever since. But I think it is not impossible for him to rebuild at least some of the bridges. You've got to remember, this is a man who said no to same-sex marriage and who stopped the boats as immigration minister and who praised coal in Parliament.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows the rule on crops.
It's coal. It was dug up by men and women who work and live in the electorates of those who sit opposite.
But for all the sweet talk about now uniting, new leadership, new generation, Scott Morrison will unite nothing in the Liberal Party until he changes some of the policies that have turned off so many Conservative MPs and that also have made so many Liberal voters switch to One Nation, particularly in Queensland. And you've got to remember that Malcolm Turnbull's leadership was destroyed when 13 coalition MPs last week threatened to vote against his national energy guarantee in Parliament. But this is still the same policy that has been backed by Morrison and designed by his new Liberal Deputy Leader, Josh Frydenberg, the Minister for Energy and the Environment. Now, I rate Josh Frydenberg. He's smart and more conservative than often thought. But these are the guys that we're now going to be looking to see whether they really will junk the rest of the National Energy Guarantee. Will they scrap the Paris Agreement on global warming? Are they going to cut back on the tidal wave of immigrants, 250,000 a year? Now, so far in his press conference today, at least, Scott Morrison hasn't said what it's going to do on any of those things. There's no policy changes yet. We've got to change a leader, but no idea if there's a change of direction.
But it really does come back to those three things. Keeping our economy strong, keeping Australians safe, and keeping Australians together.
Still, as you can tell, the former Australian tourism chief has got a good line for slogans, and I think you'll hear more of them, but we need the substance. Now, so far, most commentators seem to be judging this as purely a popularity contest, but the challenge to Turnbull was always driven more by policy. Now, Scott Morrison, as you can tell, is sure going to be able to sell things a lot better, but that doesn't mean that much until what he sells is what voters want to buy. By Morrison's deeds will voters and Conservatives now judge him. Morrison has started reasonably well, but let's see the policy, shall we? So the Liberals started today with 4 contenders for the Prime Minister. Malcolm Turnbull, of course, former Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton, Foreign Affairs Minister Julie Bishop, and the man who actually won, Treasurer Scott Morrison. But did the Liberals make the right choice? Joining me on the first of a changing series of panels tonight is former Labor strategist Bruce Hawker, now head of the Campaigns and Communications Group, Peter Credlin, wonderful Sky News host, friend and former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Tony Abbott, and Ray Hadley for the first time, the top-rating host of Sydney's 2GB, the man that Malcolm Turnbull blames in part for his fall and who made Scott Morrison a star on his show until a rather spectacular bust-up that we will get to. Ray, I may as well start with you. Scott Morrison, he speaks directly, plainly, he radiates energy, he's bold. Is he the right choice? For particularly the kind of people that are great fans of yours in Western Sydney, the suburbs where the Liberals really need to win.
Well, if he becomes the old Scott Morrison, he'll be a cracker. Because he was fantastic in opposition, he was fantastic under Tony Abbott, and then Malcolm Turnbull got him and turned him into some sort of Stockholm Syndrome victim, where he wouldn't say what he thought, he wouldn't talk. And the drama I had with him, he said he couldn't appear for his regular Monday appearance, and he bobbed up with John Fane on the ABC, which is rather insulting in itself, because he told me a lie. He said that he had something else on. He didn't tell me it was a radio interview. But I was getting email after email and call after call from, listeners who said, why do you have him on? He doesn't say anything anymore. He's gone from being this polarising conservative who'll say what he thinks to being a wet blanket. And so it probably suited our needs at the time to move on, and we replaced him with Dutton. And, of course, Dutton is someone, despite the fact that he remained loyal to the Prime Minister, who said what he thought. Now, just on the Prime Minister, I saw that earlier piece where he referred to insurgents. One of his acolytes, of course, on Channel 9 referred to us as terrorists. So there's a theme here, insurgents and terrorists. Now, I did have fears for the well-being of the Prime Minister today when the whip went to his office and said, look, I've got the 43 signatures, I've checked them all. He then wanted a forensic analysis of the signatures or he wouldn't come out and declare the party meeting. So eventually, when he wouldn't take her word for it, Dutton marched to his office. I'd like to have been there, a fly on the wall during that conversation, showed him the 43 names. I think then he dropped off the forensic analysis and went to the party room. But all this was about stalling to give Scott Morrison a bit more time so that Michael
That's absolutely right. But I understand my deep throat says they were all checking whether the handwriting on the petition was Ray Hadley's, but apparently not so. I've got to say, Bruce, Ray's point, right, that for a long time Scott Morrison spoke directly the kind of things that Ray's audience would have loved, and then went sort of Turnbull-ish and blanded out a bit. That's at least a little part forgivable, isn't it? And the fact that he actually worked for a Prime Minister, and you can't chance your arm too much without making him look stupid.
Well, it's one of the problems you have, particularly in today's multimedia world where, so many people stare at every word you say for as many hours as there are in the day. The danger is that you become a victim to your advisors and you lose that spontaneity. And it's something you've got to be very careful about as a politician, because once you sound inauthentic, as I think Turnbull did, you're really in big trouble. And I think that's something that anyone who aspires to be Prime Minister really needs to be careful about. You look at the great successors as Prime Ministers like, Hawke and Keating, Howard, you always felt that they were saying what they believed in, and they spoke a language which people tended to understand. That's a really important thing for him to try to, to remember as Prime Minister. He seems to have that. He had a bit of that today, or mind you, there was nothing in what he said that distinguished him in any way in a policy sense from Malcolm Turnbull. He really is the accidental Prime Minister in that regard. He's the fellow that the moderates and the centrists got up because they couldn't stomach Dutton, rather than because he's demonstrating that there's a significant policy difference between him and Turnbull, which is something he's got to deal with.
Absolutely correct, Bruce. Absolutely correct. But Peter, that in a sense is why I'm giving him a pass for today's press conference. Lots of slogans, a bit vacuous, but they sound all right. But the point with this is that he actually is an accidental Prime Minister. I can't expect him to have all these policies if he didn't expect 2 days ago to become Prime Minister.
Well, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt that the Scott Morrison I knew when I worked for Tony Abbott was the Scott Morrison who stopped the boats. It's Scott Morrison who was a really effective shadow minister during the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt that now that he is in the top job, he's a little bit emancipated. The shackles can come off and the real Scott Morrison can come out. I agree with absolutely what Ray Hadley had to say. He used to have a wonderful way of talking about difficult issues. Now, they have some difficult policy issues. Immigration, much easier to explain. The energy issue, very, very complex. And all ordinary people do is open up a bill that gets higher and higher and higher and hear words that make no sense coming out of Canberra with an obsession about some agreement that was signed off nearly 3 years ago that most of the world is not abiding by. So this will be the challenge. Now, if Scott decides that he's got to junk things that he might have agreed to under Turnbull and be his own man, because he does understand the party and he does understand the base, well, then he may well survive as Prime Minister beyond the next election. But if he doesn't, if he has to kowtow to the ghost of Malcolm Turnbull in every cabinet decision, well, he'll be one of the shortest-lived Prime Ministers that we've got.
But Ray, are you going to welcome him back, give him another chance on 2GB? And if you do, I mean, no one understands your audience more than you do. It's a very powerful, important audience politically. What do you expect him to say that would actually go down a treat with that audience?
Stop the BS. Very simple. Peter's hit the nail on the head. He's capable of winning the election. But the first thing he should do, he hasn't spoken to Tony Abbott for 3 years. And I don't think Tony's losing any sleep over it, but he should pick up the phone tonight, ring Abbott and say, I want you back on board. He should ring Dutton secondly and say, I want you on board as well. That'd be the smartest thing he could do for the electorate and for himself. Then all of a sudden, he gives himself a firm base with the Conservative vote. Don't worry about whether it's centres or lefts or rights of the party. What he needs to do is reinvigorate the voters, the Conservative voters who turned out and tuned out to Malcolm Turnbull. So he needs to do that immediately. He needs to pick up the phone, make his peace with Abbott. Dutton will be a bit easier. I'm sure Peter wants to serve under him, as he indicated in that interview you played earlier today. As far as I'm concerned, look, my role in this has been overplayed by Malcolm Turnbull and his acolytes. I mean, for God's sake, we've got 18% of the audience. That means a large chunk of Sydney and Brisbane don't listen to me. So, I mean, I've been fervent. In fact, my colleague Alan Jones has been a little more fervent about all of this. And it's a simple fact. He's looking for people to blame. Well, Malcolm, I'd say to you, look in the mirror, mate. The image you see is the person to blame. Your policies were ineffective, you couldn't convince the electorate, and finally, you couldn't convince your colleagues. You wasted our time, you aspired to a job you were not capable of doing, and now, given the tiptoe by your colleagues, you want to blame the media. Wake up to yourself. Retire gracefully, count your money at Point Piper, and bugger off and leave us alone.
Bruce, Malcolm Turnbull again, yesterday and today, and it's a point echoed by people as brief like Chris Ullman on Channel 9, and you hear it on the ABC, is blaming Ray, Alan, Peter, me, News Limited papers, particularly the Australian and the Daily Telegraph, Sky, for his downfall. Now, obviously, that's gone down a real treat with 7:30, for instance, on the ABC. What credence do you give it?
Very little, really. I think the thing that brought down Turnbull was that he was essentially out of step with a large number of both his constituents and his party room. And people like Tony Abbott were never really going to let him off the hook. And so whenever he was forced into a back down, whether it was over the National Energy Guarantee or over taxation for big companies or whatever, he continued to reinforce the point that he was inauthentic and out of touch, not only with the electorate but with his party room. And that was, in the end, what really did the man in. Having said that, I think it's very difficult for Scott Morrison to turn around and say, well, I wasn't any of the things that I did when I was Treasurer for Malcolm Turnbull. I mean, now you've got a Prime Minister who was the architect of the tax cuts for big business, and think Labor's not going to remind the public about that, and his deputy is the architect of the National Energy Guarantee. So where are the big changes which really justified the change from Turnbull to Scott Morrison? He's got to come out and demonstrate what they are and do it pretty soon. Otherwise, Labor's got a huge gap it can run through, and it'll just say, well, what was the point of all this? We just changed leaders, we didn't change policy, and they're still out of touch with the electorate as much as they were before. And they're squabbling and they're divided.
Bruce, are you available to tip to the Liberal Party?
Well,
Bruce touches a very good point here, Peter.
But Julia Gillard had no answers for these same questions either.
Yeah, but it was slightly different because Julia Gillard was the assassin. Here you can, you know...
oh, Andrew, you need to get out to some back rooms and see the play for what it was. But in any event, I mean, Malcolm Turnbull did not hold over for 48 hours, hiding under his desk, demanding blood and 43 signatures if he wasn't part of all of this. So let's move on from all of that insider chat. I think you can reinvent yourself. I think you absolutely can. You've just got to get out there and you've got to own it. and you've got to speak in syllables that people can understand. You've got to take them with you, but you need to have some shock and awe changes, a couple of shock and awe changes that Australians are going to look and say, righto, there has been regime change. There's a new bloke in there and he means business. Because this, mincing around the edges on some of these policy changes will do nothing to bring people back. They have to demonstrate that they have heard the message. See, the party room is an echo chamber of people who are not represented at the ballot box supporting the Liberal Party. They've absolutely got to deliver those sorts of policies and in a way that the base can say, you've heard my message, finally you're listening, I'll give you the time of day. Because right now, news poll after news poll, Ray Hadley show after Ray Hadley show, I listen to him every day, Ray, your punters are so angry, most of them aren't prepared to come back unless they see real change.
But this is the last question to you, Ray. This is, in fact, going to be a little bit of a dilemma for Scott Morrison, because if he goes back on 2GB, if you let him back and if Alan will have him back, the point here is he is going back to the beast that the ex-Prime Minister is blaming for his downfall. Scott Morrison either has to say, well, look, you did do that, or he's got to treat you as actually the ally in getting to the voters he needs. That's going to be a bit of awkward for him.
Not really, because if he dissociates himself from the Prime Minister, that'll say to our listeners, oh, well, yes, he doesn't agree with what the Prime Minister says, so that's point one. Of course he'd be welcome back. I mean, I did say today in the heat of the battle that I thought if he was the Prime Minister it would be a dreadful set of circumstances for Australia, because I think Peter's right. This wasn't happen chance. This was orchestrated. And despite all the problems I've had with Scott, he is without doubt one of the most cunning politicians we've ever come across. He's orchestrated this. Photius has orchestrated the numbers for him. And the 45-40 vote wasn't an accident. And the fact that more time was allotted, as we had the siege mentality for the Prime Minister, for the troops to gather instead of going to a party room meeting sometime earlier, so that all of a sudden Julie Bishop's there in a three-quartered contest. She knows she's going early, and all of a sudden Morrison's left there. This was not an accident. Morrison's very, very astute when it comes to all this sort of thing, and he got what he wanted in the end. And on the way out the door, he's got the Prime Minister thinking he's a really good bloke when he shafted him. I mean, that's a remarkable set of circumstances.
But I think you're right.
He shafted him, but he thinks he's a good bloke.
Yeah, my question was predicated on, yes, indeed, he will have to disavow the ex-Prime Minister's preferred narrative that he's just a victim of the wicked media. And we'll see but he does that.
And that is that's a very significant problem.
I did get a text from him. Hang on, I don't know, can you do this? Tell people what people text you. I got into trouble for this earlier in the week, but I said, I said to him, Scott, is this still your mobile? Because I haven't had need to ring him lately. And he said, for now.
Well, that's something. That's something. I thought something else was coming. I thought I need to get the red button ready.
He didn't say, "Oh, mate, welcome back. Lovely to have you." He didn't say anything like that.
Ray Hadley, great to have you. Thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
And after the break, the rest of the panel who's staying here will be joined by One Nation leader Pauline Hanson.
Now, back live with Andrew Bolt with the Bolt Report.
The Liberals today replaced Malcolm Turnbull, a multi-millionaire in a mansion at Point Piper, with Scott Morrison, a policeman's son from the Shire, which includes Cronulla. Now, the Liberals will be counting on Morrison to be better at talking to the voters in the seats they most need to win at the next election, predominantly in Western Sydney and also in Queensland, where Liberal voters have been hemorrhaging, deserting in droves for One Nation. Joining Bruce Hawker and Peter Credlow on the panel is One Nation leader Pauline Hanson. Thanks for joining us, Pauline. What do you reckon? There were a number of Queensland Liberal members that said they wanted Peter Dutton there because he was from Queensland, he could talk their language, and he can really take your voters back to the LNP fold. But they chose Scott Morrison instead. How scared are you that he will do that job?
No, look, I'm not scared about it whatsoever. I don't think Peter Dutton would have really gone for the leadership challenge if there was someone else. I think because he is centre of right There was no one else to actually represent the Conservative views. Tony Abbott, they wouldn't give him another go. Who else was there really to take it up to the Prime Minister? So that's why Peter Dutton was basically, and I think, was pushed into this. Once he saw the numbers that he had no option but to do the challenge again. You're right, Malcolm Turnbull manipulated the whole lot. He then got Scott Morrison and Julie Bishop to run for it, and hence Peter Dutton lost it. Scott Morrison, I've always said that he had ambitions to be Prime Minister, and I could always see him as Prime Minister in the future. But he's got to distance himself now from Malcolm Turnbull and not be a clone of his. Do I like Josh Frydenberg as the deputy? No, I don't, because he's tagged with the neg and the electricity and rising costs, and I don't think Australians will get over that. By changing him for Treasurer and so close to election, I don't think that's the go either. So anyway, it's going to be quite interesting who they put into the policy positions. But can I just add this also? They knew and they saw the writing on the wall, the poll that we received in the seat of Longman, where we increased our vote by 6 percentage points. The thing is that the Nats were getting nervous about it, so were the Libs, and they could see that they were going to lose a lot of seats in Queensland to One Nation. So that's why the pressure came on them to do something about it. So it's only through the pressure of One Nation that they saw they were going to get decimated the next election by the Labor Party.
Well, there is a lot of truth in that. Bruce, we're talking about, who would be the better leader? Would it have been Dutton? Is it Morrison? But looking at it, and, except that you're from the Labor side generally way back when, but can anyone now save the Liberals, do you think?
I think it's going to be very difficult for the same sort of reasons that Peter and Tony Abbott were so effective against Kevin Rudd and my team in 2013. The damage had already been done because we'd had the divisions over the Gillard-Rudd period. And when Rudd came back in 2013, he didn't do too badly until the election campaign. And then when the Libs opened up with all the ads about division and so forth, it was all over for us because the electorate don't forgive that. And I think it's going to be a very, very difficult task for Scott Morrison to live down a lot of the things that he's been part and parcel of. The tax cuts for big business and being part and parcel of that, not wanting a bank royal commission. All these things are going to be regurgitated during the election campaign. So you can talk about reinventing him, but you can only reinvent yourself to a certain point. History will catch up with you, and I think that's the danger for Morrison and co now, which gives Labor a head start. If you look at all the Vox Pops today, it's bring the election on now, bring the election on now. When they say that, that means they want to vote the government out. And I think that's the big challenge for him. He's got time, though. He had more time than Rudd did in 2013. He's got a good 9 months, but it is a long time. He's got a lot to do in that time.
Well, Peter, one of the issues, yes, he has got 9 months, if the government lasts that long, because, of course, Malcolm Turnbull has resigned. That's one vote they can't count on in the meantime. We've seen other people, we've seen by-elections, we've seen people, God forbid it doesn't happen, die in office or whatever, for one reason or another. They've got to be lucky they last that long.
I think you're right. I just want to respond, though, to something that Bruce was saying there. I think it's a little bit different now because people are now so attuned to this changing of Prime Minister that they don't like it. They're very frustrated. I accept that. But it doesn't have the shock value that when Rudd was there one night and then Gillard was there the next day. But more importantly, Labor went back to Rudd because people felt there needed to be a big correction there. What the Liberal Party base wanted to see was the removal of Turnbull. I think many of them were happy for the change. They may not be happy necessarily with the outcome, and the test will be policies. But for the Liberal Party base, Turnbull was the real issue. So his removal in some quarters will be celebrated. In terms of the vulnerabilities, Andrew, going forward, the by-election is there and it's real. There is a legal precedent that they could push it out up to 6 months. That's happened in the past in the Menzies era. They've held them over going into a general election, but that really only buys them to about the time of the New South Wales election at the end of March next year.
And in the meantime, they're
Wentworth
still
will be
down that
hard.
Turnbull's vote, even though, you know,
Correct,
he's out of the office.
Malcolm will take his bat and ball and go home almost immediately. And look, Labor have it all over the coalition in terms of their parliamentary tactics and their messaging in question time, and the government will be very vulnerable to no confidence motions. I mean, you can have a division, as Pauline will know, and the Libs are sometimes caught in the toilets and wandering back from Aussies. They're like Brown's cows.
Well, just this week they won. The government won one vote, one critical vote. They only one vote, and there you go.
The whip's going to have to get a whip.
Well, I'll say that much. Now, Pauline, you're not in the business to advise the Liberals on what they've got to do to win, but you have mentioned some issues where you're going to be campaigning on, which suggests exactly where they need to be. One was electricity prices. What else would you expect them to come at you with? And if they don't, forget it.
Immigration. They have to cut immigration numbers. It's the white elephant in the room. It's impacting on housing, on infrastructure, on roads, on water, sewerage, nursing homes, schools, hospitals, you name it, everything. The number of migrants who are coming in here. And Scott Morrison alluded, we must be able to invite into the country who we want to. He's using the same language that I used 20 years ago. John Howard started using the language. Now he's starting to use it because it's what the people want to hear. Cut back immigration, deal with the electricity prices. I know businesses that are going to go from $350,000 a year in electricity up to $550,000 a year by 2020. They're going to shut their doors. They employ 55 people. They're shutting their doors. I'm hearing it from the hospitality. You've got restaurants, you've got takeaways, you've got small businesses. They are escalating prices. They can't keep the doors open. I'm warning them. You either put in new coal-fired power stations, you start talking about uranium, nuclear energy in the country, start the debate, because you've got to get down the cost of electricity, otherwise we've destroyed industries and manufacturing. And I was pleased to hear that he started talking about the drought and dealing with it. Well, stop band-aiding the whole issue and start putting in dams, watering Australia, look at the Bradfield scheme and start bringing the water down from the Ord up that's flowing out to the oceans up in Northern Territory. These are things that he has to do. Go for the big, tell people that we have a vision for this country, and I'm sick of hearing from politicians who only just have it till the next election to secure their own seats. I want long-term vision, those people that are going to tell the future generations what we can do as a nation. I want to see prosperity.
Well, there's a slight problem, of course, because Scott Morrison rejected a cut in immigration when it was suggested by both Peter Dutton and Tony Abbott, and Josh Frydenberg's the architect of the National Energy Guarantee, so that's going to cut their room to move.
That's
Bruce
right.
Hawker, thank you so much for joining us, mate. It was good to catch up with you.
Pleasure,
Peter Credner, thank you so much for coming in. Pauline Hanson will still be around for the next panel, where we're joined by the man who wrote Malcolm Turnbull's biographer, after the break.
Back live with Andrew Bolt with the Bolt Report.
We should not forget that if 3 MPs had today changed their minds, Malcolm Turnbull would still be Prime Minister for now. The Liberal Party today voted only by a narrow margin to even have this leadership contest that Scott Morrison won. 40 Liberal MPs voted against having a vote for a new Prime Minister, and 45 were for the ballot, which means 40 actually voted to keep Malcolm Turnbull on, even after all this chaos. And this shows, to me, a lot of loyalty. And I was further struck by the fact that Labor leader Bill Shorten today paid a very generous tribute to Malcolm Turnbull today, saying Turnbull had come to politics relatively late in life because he was driven by public service, the desire to serve. He said, I don't think any Australian Prime Minister has used the word love more frequently in his public remarks. Anyone who listened to him speak could always hear his deep and profound love for his wife Lucy, for their children and grandchildren, but also his abiding love for his country. Very generous. Joining the panel now is again Pauline Hanson, but also Labor Senator Kimberley Kitching and Paddy Manning, author of Born to Rule, the unauthorised biography of Malcolm Turnbull. Paddy, I'd love to start with you. Malcolm Turnbull's been attacked by Labor, he's been attacked by me and others. I've called him a narcissist. His last 24 hours in office were, in my opinion, disgraceful, bitter and vengeful, and I wouldn't be alone in saying that. The papers are full of it. But obviously there is another side to him. You have done this biography. What have we missed?
Oh, geez, Andrew, I suppose I could launch into a defence of him. I think he was dignified today in his exit, although obviously this has been a chaotic spill, and to what end? I think that he was quite dignified today, and I think in some ways he went out a winner because, you know, he has managed to, you know, see his ally Scott Morrison, you know, appointed, and some measure of his legacy presumably will remain intact. There'll be more continuity in policy now than you know you would have expected under Peter Dutton. So,
Paddy, I totally agree with that assessment that he comes out a winner in one sense. I'm not so sure about the graceful at all, but we'll come back to you on that one. But Kimberly, what have I missed? I mean, given that Bill Shorten, your friend, has given this generous tribute to a man that has been attacking as a heartless millionaire. Where did this sentiment come from?
I think that Bill is a very gracious person, and I think that he, obviously, as he says, you know, he's listened to a lot of speeches Malcolm Turnbull has given, and I think that, you know, at the end, he, you know, acknowledged that and acknowledged the service. I mean, Bill is very keenly aware of the sacrifice that people make in public life. And that's not to say that it's not a privilege as well, but there is a sacrifice. And I think, obviously, Bill is, you know, is aware of that, and I think that was reflected in the statement he made about Malcolm Turnbull.
Now, Pauline, you've spent a lot of time in Malcolm Turnbull's office. How did you get on with him?
I got on very well with him. He listened to me. I took a couple of issues to him, and especially one. It was about the compulsory buy-up of farming land by the Singaporean military. I took the map in, I sat down with him, and I explained everything to him. The next morning he said, OK, we'll make it non-compulsory. There was a couple of other things, you know, that he listened to what I had to say, and I respect him for that, and I thanked him for it. I had a voice. Didn't always agree with me, but he gave me the time. So, and I think that his speech today, I thought it was very gracious of him. I do. You made a comment, some of the snide remarks and that he made, but overall he laid out what he had achieved over that period of time, and I think that he did achieve quite a bit, especially with the ABCC. That was very important to do that, and he got the tax cuts through for the personal tax cuts, which we supported. He didn't get his corporate tax cuts through that Scott Morrison was pushing, and also Cormann, but and I blocked that. I don't think it was right for the country. But, you know, we're moving on from now, and I'm hoping that Scott Morrison listens to the people of Australia, because it's all about, you know, the 25 million people out there that want change. They want a leader that's going to listen to them about the issues, yeah.
No, well, look, since two of you now said that you said it was gracious, I'll just explain why I thought it wasn't. And Paddy, I'll come to you on this. One is that in his valedictory speech, he starts whacking at enemies. He gave a very short list of people he thanked. He excluded people like Matthias Cormann, who had been a rock throughout his term of office. Yeah. It was quite petty, I thought. And then when he got to taking questions from journalists, he pointedly went only to ones that were friendly to him. All of the left, by the way. The ABC, Laura Tingle, and then Catherine Murphy, who got called by a nickname of The Guardian. No questions to Murdoch newspapers at all. I thought there was a little vindictiveness, and I'm just wondering, isn't this also, Paddy, how he left the Republican movement, how he left his leadership the last time when he lost it in 2009? Doesn't this run a little bit in his personality?
And how he's running now.
Well, yes.
No, I think that's
Paddy.
Terribly unfair. I was in the pack yesterday, not today. But all that happened when he decided to take questions yesterday was that he got 40 journos shouting at him. So today, and in fact, in the journo pack yesterday, there were people saying, just pick one. So today what he did was pick them, and he picked. I just don't see everything as left, right. It's a kind of blindness. I didn't see a pack of left journos. He picked Phil Curry from the Fin Review. Is that left? I mean,
well, I think so.
Oh, really?
Well, you're the editor of the Monthly, so perhaps our measurements of where left is may be varying a bit, I think. Look, I really like Phil, but I think broadly is left of centre, even though he's writing for the Fin Review.
Oh, okay. The Fin Review edited by Michael Stutchbury.
Yeah,
that's mad.
Phil is not Michael Stutchbury. Michael Stutchbury's over here and Phil is over there. They're different people. I mean,
Oh, but it's a form of madness.
It's not like the Monthly that everyone has to be of a certain political case. But going back to my point, though, Paddy, you remember his amazing split with Kerry O'Brien, where he then went and shopped the guy, Kerry Packer. With the Republican referendum, John Howell's the man who broke the nation's heart. He lashes out, and I'm just wondering if it's got anything to do with his character.
Well, I think he does lash out, and I don't think we've seen the end of Malcolm Turnbull. I think that, he's been described as the soul of indiscretion by his own wife in Australian Story in 2009. He could well, I think, that we could see some almighty retribution coming from Malcolm Turnbull. I don't think we've seen anything in the, yet of what might come, once he feels truly liberated, and whether it's in the form of a tell-all memoir, but bearing in mind that he already started a memoir, or some kind of essay or tell-all interview. I think there are a few more grenades that he might throw. And I don't think he's going to feel very obliged to the Liberal Party.
I hear the pin's being pulled out already, mate. I think you're spot on that. And I think John Hewson will seem like a pussy in comparison to what Malcolm Turnbull is going to do to his own party. And that's, in fact, the history, isn't it? Malcolm Fraser, they all turn on the Liberals when they are out of office. But, Kimberley, wargaming this, you're close to Bill Shorten, you're wargaming this in Labor. When the name went out and the winner is Scott Morrison, did you say yes? Or did you say, oh, damn, I was kind of hoping it was Julie Bishop?
I don't think anyone should take any pleasure from what we've seen in the last week. I think it has been a truly appalling spectacle. Because remember, the whole of the polity is then brought down. But I think that, when I think Scott Morrison has sat around that cabinet table making the same decisions as Malcolm Turnbull, and I think what we are going to be seeing more of the same. And I think that they still have not addressed the divisions, the ideological divisions they have within their party.
I think that's correct.
So, for example, are they free marketeers or are they coal socialists? Are they for immigration or anti-immigration? Are they, for fiscal responsibility, or are they, debt
to be honest, neither Labor nor Liberals are into fiscal responsibility.
Well, actually,
Pauline,
that's not true.
Jump in.
That is not true.
Yeah, you want to jump in,
Kimberley, they have double debt in the last
Labor
since Scott Morrison has been Treasurer.
Kimberley, stop throwing stones. Labor, hey, come on. People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. We went through it with Gillard, Rudd Gillard. You've had Hawke and Keating. You've actually had, and that time they got rid of Bill Hayden as well. So it's under political parties. And listen, just recently you had the problem within Longman when with Bill Shorten could have been challenged for the leadership by Albanese if they didn't win all the seats. If you lost some seats. So every political party goes through this, and you're going to continually have your problems with it.
Well, not all political parties.
So don't just throw the stones at the Liberal Party. No, I don't have a leadership challenge, okay? I don't have anyone challenging me for the leadership. No.
Paddy, I'm reluctant to get in the middle of this because men never come out well in these things.
Can appoint someone as president for life. But, the ALP, I think the ALP has learned from this.
It's a smart move.
That enshrined in our
one question to Paddy. Paddy, the rise of Scott Morrison has been greeted with modified rapture by Conservatives, right? On the left, what are you saying? Dear God, spare us this monster? Or are you thinking, yeah, that's someone we could live with, given he's a Liberal anyway?
Oh, you'd have to ask the left, Andrew. I don't know. I'm a journalist.
Mate, on the rare occasions I see your publication, you're not fooling me. But give me the answer, do you think?
Of Morrison? I think he's less popular than Malcolm Turnbull. So I think it's a crazy coup and it hasn't achieved its objectives. You know, it's blown up in the face of Tony Abbott and everyone who backed it. Because, you know, the objective, if you boil it down, what are we talking about? Pulling out of the Paris Agreement? You know,
hey,
this is
you're singing my song. Hey, mate, I'm sorry, I've run out of time, but that is a most excellent place in which to leave it. But I really appreciate you coming on, Paddy. You must have you on more often, if you don't mind coming into the belly of the beast. Kimberly Kitching and Pauline Hanson, thank you so much for your time too. Great to have you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Andrew.
More after the break. More after...
Back live with Andrew Bolt with the Bolt Report.
Well, I've got to wish Scott Morrison luck with the Liberals. I mean, it's a very difficult thing. You'd think Malcolm Turnbull, the man of the left, first dragged the party too far to the left, then tries to please the right, stood for nothing. People said, chuck him out. Tony Abbott before him, man of the right, tried to please the left, stood for nothing, chuck him out. We've got to be a bit less pure about this and recognise we might all be activists, but the politicians have to deal with the art of the compromise, and not every compromise is a sellout. Well, don't leave your dial, or leave your dial right where it is. Ashley Gillen is next with the Leadership Special. Good night.